everyone, to the St. Pete by Night Twitch stream where we play St. Petersburg by Night, a massive multiplayer 5th edition game set in the world of darkness in St. Petersburg, Florida. My name is Kent. I am Misha Kent on all social media. I am the lead storyteller of St. Pete by Night, but I am also the host of After Dark, which is what you are watching right now. After Dark is our behind the scenes kind of special program that we do where we talk about the world of darkness in general, but we also talk specifically about our game, St. Pete by Night. We talk to some of the players, we talk to some of the storytellers, we talk to the movers and shakers that make this game possible. But tonight, you're stuck with just me. I have no guests, I have no special additions to the program. I'm just going to be talking at you for a good long while as we talk about St. Pete by Night and the lore and how the game came to be. This has been a much requested program, a much requested piece of content that a lot of the players and viewers out there have asked for quite some time. I'm going to be talking about how I came up with the game, what the inspirations behind it were, as well as some of the lore leading up to one of the major events that kind of kick-started the game itself, which was the exodus from Tampa and into St. Petersburg. I thought tonight would be a good time to kind of get into that as we are about to go on break for our Kindred Con celebration, where we're going to have tons and tons of members of our community flooding into St. Pete, Florida to just kind of have a meetup, a get-together, a sightseeing tour to see the city and where some of the major and dramatic events of the game took place, as well as just a good opportunity to connect as a whole. But before we kind of have that big major event happen, I thought, let's talk about the game. Because it's been almost 2 years to the day since the first session launched back in 2021, or 2022, my mistake. And now we are coming up on the 2-year anniversary in less than a week, actually a week to the day at this point. And it is an amazing, momentous event for me. Before we launch into all that, though, I want to start with a story this evening. A story that I wrote to try and kind of give the players a good kind of catch-up, to paint a picture, if you will, telling them about the setting as a whole. So let's do that. Originally settled in 1823, Tampa has been a long-standing pillar of the Camarilla in Florida under the rule of its founding Ventru prince, Marius. Even throughout the sect's struggles over the past 2 centuries, the city has remained in the control of the Ivory Tower, beating back the threats of Sabbat, anarchs, and even encroaching lupines. Marius was viewed as the shining example of leadership, stability, and dominance, turning his city into a prospering stronghold with the help of his Primogen Council and his Bruja sheriff, Bloody Mary. Then, the beckoning began. In the early 2000s, Marius began to feel the call. Being an elder Ventru of a high generation, he was far from immune to the pull toward the Middle East. A pull to fight in a war of elders. Feeling the need to remain in control of all that he'd built, Marius did everything he could to resist it, but doing so was a fruitless effort that would slowly break down his will and drive him further into madness. Out of desperation and his clan's inherent need to control, Marius turned to the only solution he could find: diablerie. He started with using it as a secret means of execution and punishment within his own clan, but the more time passed, the greater his need became, and it wasn't long before others started to take notice. Others, like the Toreador Primogen, Isabel de Navarra. An elder kindred in her own right, raised in the courts of Europe, Isabel had been a loyal servant to Marius when she first joined his court in the mid-1800s. She had risen through the ranks of Harpy, Herald, and Whip overseas, but it was as Primogen in Tampa that she truly found her confidence as a leader and caretaker of her beloved clan. Because of her impeccable service, Isabel was granted the city of St. Petersburg for her clan territory, being the southern neighbors of the Tremere up in Clearwater. This was when her dream for a better Camarilla started, or truly began to take shape. As she studied and learned more about this unstoppable force that was taking many of the elders away, she foresaw that the future of the Camarilla would be in the hands of the younger kindred. She knew that either the Camarilla needed to adapt or it would inevitably collapse to the threats of the growing anarch movement, as well as the Second Inquisition. When she settled into her territory, she immediately began to fortify and started planning for the event that would eventually become known as the Exodus. During this time, she subtly tested Marius' sanity and control. It was the diablerie and execution of Esmeralda Alvarez, her longtime companion and protege, at the hands of Prince Marius that caused her to act. In January of 2020, the Toreador Primogen led a mass departure from Tampa after a vote of no confidence and a challenge against the current prince was rebuked. Dozens of kindred fled across the Tampa Bay, some taking the bridges, others taking to the sea in a bloody and murderous event known as the Exodus. In his madness, Marius had completely unleashed his sheriff, Bloody Mary, to destroy any and all traitors to his rule. It was a violent conflict that lasted for almost 2 months and led to the destruction of many within the kindred society. While the losses were primarily amongst ghouls and retainers, some of the kindred that were unable to flee also met their end. When the coronavirus pandemic hit in full effect in late March of 2020, the entire area went into lockdown, including the kindred. The illness made it almost impossible to ensure the protection of the masquerade. Limited ability to access vitae from the kind caused the kindred to take cover and quarantine in their own right. It was discovered that there was a mutated version of the virus that was affecting the kindred, even driving some into torpor unwillingly. This may have been the deciding factor that gave St. Petersburg its independence, for they did not have the forces or ability to continue the conflict with Tampa. Because of the pandemic and the lockdown that ensued, hostilities faltered, which granted time for Isabel and the forces of St. Petersburg to better fortify Pinellas County. They created a border that, while tested, withstood the attempts by Tampa to retake the domain. In January of 2022, Isabel de Navarra claimed Praxis of St. Petersburg, declaring it a new city for the Camarilla and hope for the future of the sect. Unfortunately, it's not that simple. Praxis needs to be ratified by the inner circle for one to truly be part of the sect. On February 19th, 2022, Ventru Justicar Lucind was dispatched to determine the validity of Isabel's claim. A conclave was held at the Visiting Succubus Club aboard a cruise ship in the Gulf of Mexico, hosted by Victoria Ash. Members of the courts of St. Petersburg and Tampa were in attendance. Marius argued his case, stating that the actions Isabel had taken were that of, quote, anarchy and rebellion, end quote, and were a direct violation of the traditions. Isabel argued that Marius was becoming a weak leader and was a, quote, disgrace to the sect and what it stands for, end quote. Eventually, the Justicar declared that St. Petersburg would be granted 6 months to make some necessary changes and prove itself before it would be made official. If Isabel was going to be a champion for the younger kindred, she needed to ensure that they were taught the proper ways of the Camarilla. The clan list would have to be accounted for, and the reckless masquerade risks had to stop. She ordered that Tampa would not be allowed to interfere during this time, but if St. Petersburg failed, it would be returned to its original domain. The next 6 months carried a great deal of struggle at the hands of Sabbat and Second Inquisition, but St. Petersburg continued to grow and fought for its right to remain. Striving to gather support, they sent emissaries to many cities within the Camarilla, including Chicago, New Orleans, Edinburgh, and Boston. They even sent emissaries to Miami, who bore witness to former Prince Gilbert Duane's betrayal of his longtime sect. He turned the city to the hands of the anarch movement by murdering many of his own loyal Camarilla Primogen. On September 25th, 2022, the Camarilla returned to St. Pete, represented by Tremere Justicar Ian Carfax. Though he wasn't impressed initially by St. Petersburg's evolution, he was eventually swayed to grant praxis to Prince Isabel de Navarra, stating that, quote, "the eyes of the Camarilla will be watching you," end quote. That was how St. Petersburg came to be, but that was only the beginning of the story. So, St. Petersburg holds a very special place in my heart, and I'm going to talk about a little bit of backstory that led up to kind of all of this coming to be. As always, on After Dark, we accept your questions in the chat as we are going, and I have my beautiful, wonderful, amazingly talented moderator, Champ, watching the chat, and she's going to be DMing me your questions as they come in. So if you did not have an opportunity to submit any questions in advance for this very special lore stream, you can go ahead and submit them in the chat, and Champ will make sure that I see them. So in late 2015, I had taken a trip from my home state of Michigan at the time to visit some friends who were living in Florida. It was a birthday trip, so it took place in November, and anybody who knows November in Michigan knows that that is a very kind of the beginning of a very difficult time of year. Winter is beginning to set in, and as someone who has suffered from seasonal affective disorder for most of his life, it can be the beginning of a very brutal kind of depression that takes hold. So I took this trip to St. Pete to visit with some friends, and over the week that I spent here, it was an absolute revelation, not just for my sanity and my mental health, but for my physical well-being as well. The warmer weather combined with the ability to just see the stars up in the sky above without the clouding of light pollution or such things just made me feel a sense of peace and calm within. So by February of 2016, I made the move and chose to make St. Petersburg my new home and Florida my new home state. Now, as someone who has participated in the world of darkness for over 2 decades at that point, you can't help as a storyteller, and this applies to all TTRPGs, you can't help but gain inspiration and kind of start to tell a story within your own mind based off of your surroundings. Whether you're traveling in Europe and seeing old ruins that kind of inspire you for a good D&D campaign, or you're simply traveling around a city and start to kind of develop what's the world of darkness like in this city? What kind of impression does it make in this city? St. Petersburg is an extremely artistic city. It's very gifted in the arts. In fact, I would dare say the museums per capita are larger than most kind of major cities across the world. It is a place of art. It is a place of music. It is a place of sport. It seems to have all of the kind of major elements that make a key city for the world of darkness. And over the several years that I spent here, I kind of started to get a picture in my mind of what this city was and kind of what impression the world of darkness would leave on a city such as this one. And so I quickly came to the determination that this was a place of Toreador. The artistic elements that you see from the various museums to just the streets themselves, several which are painted with shades of rainbows as well as other colors, and the graffiti, or I should say the street art that covers the sides of the most of the buildings, just felt very Toreador from its very nature. As I settled into the city more and more, I kind of came to hear more and more about the kind of dispute, I wouldn't even say dispute, almost like a rivalry between St. Petersburg and the neighboring major city of Tampa. And it kind of took a hold of me because, as someone who calls Pinellas County and St. Petersburg home, I never go to Tampa. I really don't. I don't find myself venturing across the bridge, whether it be because of the traffic, whether it be because of the city itself just being so congested and there being so much going on over there. Everything I need is on this peninsula, so I spend a great deal of time just here. I don't leave if I don't have to. It's got everything I need, and I don't see any need to venture across the bridge except for maybe the occasional concert or major event that might take place in the neighboring city. So that rivalry really stuck out to me. The rivalry of St. Pete versus Tampa. And I thought, yes, obviously in the mortal world, there's plenty of reason for that rivalry to be, but nothing in the world of darkness, in the world of mortals, doesn't have the fingerprints of the supernatural on it. Why would there be such a rivalry based off of just something as simple as traffic? Why would there be a rivalry just based off of proximity and distance? There has to be something going on behind the scenes. So the pieces started clicking into place that maybe there had been a defection. Maybe there was some kind of rebellion. But I just kind of let those thoughts settle. I knew I wanted to set a campaign here. I knew I wanted to create a chronicle and a story within this city. But this was still in maybe 2018 that I was coming up with these ideas. And I, like many of you out there, had that struggle of finding people to play with, finding games to run. I had run a couple of one-off kind of vampire stories for some of my friends in the area, but I really didn't kind of invest into gaming as much because a lot of the things like, TikTok and whatnot I had not come across yet. So I kind of just let that idea stew in the back of my head. So I ended up joining TikTok near kind of summer of 2021, and I was just doing the same thing we all do, kind of connecting with a lot of the TTRPG communities and seeing a lot of cosplaying content and a lot of other kind of very nerd appealing content across my feed, and I got more and more and more into it and got hooked into the community and met a lot of cool and amazing people in that community. A constant theme that I heard throughout that entire time was that Vampire the Masquerade, a game that I held so dear and loved for so long, was on so many bucket lists. So many people said that it was a game that they wanted to try, a game that they wanted to play, a game that they had heard of but never had experienced, and that it was on their list of games to try. Now, D&D being the, forefront leader of games was kind of at the forefront of everyone's minds, and so a lot of people were playing D&D, and so was I, and I was getting really into that community. But the fact that the world of darkness, especially Vampire the Masquerade, was on so many people's minds just got those creative sparks firing again in the back of my brain. So I decided to kind of start exploring that avenue a little bit more and started feeling it out. And as a lot of content creators on TikTok do, I wanted to come up with kind of awards or prizes for getting a certain subscriber count or a certain follower count. So for my 1,000 follower count, I decided to do a create a vampire kind of prize where I would create a vampire based off of one of my followers. That also got the gears turning, and I kind of wanted to take on another creative endeavor, which was I was going to create a campaign setting within St. Petersburg, create a story for St. Petersburg, and I would include these characters that I would create, these vampires that I would create as part of that setting. I would make them foundational pieces of that setting, and then one day, hopefully for Drive-Thru RPG or Storyteller's Vault, publish a campaign setting for St. Petersburg, because there had been several iterations of Chicago by Night, London by Night, Tokyo by Night, New York by Night, just all of these splat books for various cities all over the world. But Florida very rarely got touched upon. People tended to avoid Florida. And, people might have their biases or their reasons for doing so, but I had fallen in love with Florida, specifically St. Petersburg, and I thought this might be a fun, creative endeavor. We were in the pandemic. Everybody was still in lockdown. I was up in Michigan, staying with my son and kind of being close to him to avoid traveling too much. So I had a lot of free time on my hands and a lot of kind of opportunity to start thinking about those things. Because of how many people had said that Vampire the Masquerade was on their bucket list, it was a late night. And for those of you who know me, know that I am an insomniac and a night owl, and a late night for me could go till 6, 7 a.m. And I remember one particular night where I was laying in bed and just started thinking about these bucket lists, started thinking about people's interests. Now, I had discovered the concept of West Marches games, or West Marches games. I've heard it described both ways. But I had started getting the idea of, what if we did something like that for Vampire? I'd seen it successfully work for Dungeons and Dragons. I had seen, several different settings use this format of just you play when you can. And as someone who had nothing but time, I thought, maybe I could do this. Maybe this is something I could do. So I kind of put the idea out there as a late night insomniac burst on TikTok and said, what if I created a West Marches style Vampire the Masquerade game? Well, the response, to say the least, was surprising and exciting and at times overwhelming. A lot of people said that they would love for something like that to take place. They would be totally interested in participating in something like that. So in October of 2021, I created the Discord server, which lasts till this very day, and kind of said, hey, if this is something you're interested in, it's early development, but join the Discord, check it out. We'll talk about it. We'll see what we can make happen. The response to that was even more overwhelming. We had hundreds of people join the Discord, hundreds of people get excited about this concept. So I really made it a focus. I really leaned in and started building up this world, started building up the concept for this game. I knew I wanted to set it in St. Petersburg. I knew I wanted to have a story of rivalry with Tampa, and I knew I wanted to make it accessible to people who had never participated in anything related to the World of Darkness before. So I really wanted to make it new player friendly. I didn't want to go too hard on the World of Darkness and the rules and everything like that starting out. I wanted it to be something people could ease their way into, because I didn't know how many people were actually going to be interested, actually going to go the full way to joining the game, and I didn't know how committed people would be. So I wanted it to be kind of flexible. By the time we started accepting characters, I had over 200 and some odd proposed character concepts. And by our first Elysium, which was the introductory event on January 21st of 2022, we had, I want to say, over 120 finalized characters, and I think close to 90 to 100 people attending that first event. It was massive. It was beyond my wildest dreams. So that's where it all kind of started. Seeing the passion, the excitement for World of Darkness, seeing people wanting to go on this wild, harebrained scheme of a journey with me made it that much more important to make happen. Because I also wanted to create a safe place for people to play this game. The game can be very appealing to a certain element of player, a certain element of participant, and I knew that I wanted to kind of create a space where people could feel free to explore this game without running into some more of the toxic elements. Now, that is a kind of story unto itself, and obviously there are some growing pains and some, things that are hammered out and found out along the way, but that's kind of how it all came to be. One of the things that I love most about World of Darkness is the emphasis on storytellers versus dungeon masters. And with storytellers, all good storytellers and authors know how to paint a really good word picture. Yes, you can use visual, mediums. You can use inspirational images and photos and that kind of thing, but you really need to make your players feel like they can see the setting, that they are actually living in a world. And why I chose St. Petersburg specifically over anywhere else is that I lived here. For several years, I did professional pet sitting here. For several years, I was an Uber and a Lyft driver here. And one of my favorite hobbies is just going for late night drives. So I had seen so much of this city by the time St. Pete by Night started that I felt like I had a true understanding of the city. I had a true kind of understanding of what I wanted this area to be, and I felt like I knew it. I felt like I really could paint a vivid word picture. I'm so in awe of and truly admire storytellers out there that can do chronicles in cities that they've never been to, or chronicles of cities they visited but don't currently live in. I find that to be absolutely astonishing that anybody has that kind of level of depth of research, and that they're willing to put in the time to learn about a city that they've never been to just for the purposes of placing a chronicle there. Whereas I've always felt more comfortable basing it wherever I am. So I've run Detroit by Night, I've run various cities in Michigan before, but I'd never really worked outside of what I was familiar with. So now that I was familiar with St. Petersburg, it felt like the perfect place. And so I really, really started to take the map as it was and start dividing it up. Now, in most World of Darkness and Vampire the Masquerade Chronicles, clans don't really have territories. Maybe a specific clan might claim a specific area, but as a whole, it's not like a city is divided up between territories. Usually, in fact, a city is divided up between coteries. So different coteries will eventually gain certain domains or certain territories, but not clans. Clans just kind of control a certain aspect of the city. So, the Nosferatu will obviously claim the sewers or the cemeteries. The Venture will claim a lot of the high, established businesses and government. The Toreador will take the arts. The Tremere will tend to stick to the more occult-based things, and the clans will kind of find their own space, but they won't be divided into territories. Considering that this was a new player game and that we weren't going to have coteries in the traditional sense, I still wanted there to be kind of a group feeling to it. I wanted people to feel like they were automatically in with or connected to other players, because it can be very awkward to come into a game as the outsider, especially if there's been a community that's been running for quite some time, to find a way to find those connections, to make those connections. So I decided to make clan dynamics a very, very vital and important part of the first iteration of St. Pete by Night. So I took the map, and I took what I knew about the map, what areas kind of gave me a certain feel about the various clans, and I started dividing it up that way. Now, since St. Pete was going to be a Toreador-controlled domain, I knew that the downtown area, flush with all of the museums, especially the Dali Museum, which was a staple. I knew it was going to be a staple in the game, had to belong to the Toreador. But what were the Ventru going to do? The Ventru that usually controlled politics and controlled, most of the major metropolitan areas in most cities, what was I going to do for them? So I started thinking, what else is vital to this area? And the answer came quickly: tourism. Tourism is a vital part of Florida. It is a vital part of St. Petersburg. And I knew that I wanted to really give that kind of control, because the Ventru weren't going to leech complete control. Yes, they had seceded from a Ventru city that was Tampa, but they needed to have some kind of foothold, because I knew we were going to have Ventru players. It was inevitable that we were going to have Ventru players. It's a very kind of good, strong, sometimes easy starting clan to get into the world of darkness, so I knew the Ventru had to have a presence. So I gave them the beaches with all of the major hotels. They weren't going to necessarily be controlling politics per se, but they were going to be controlling business. So I knew that I wanted the Ventru to take over that kind of element of the area. Since they couldn't get into politics, since the Toreador were going to be very, very defensive of the political climate, they needed to have a foothold, so it was going to be tourism. And the Don Cesar, which many of you that have been here before know as the Big Pink Castle, is a kind of center point of the beaches. On the far southern end of St. Pete Beach stands this enormous hotel that is painted a bubblegum pink, which could easily be a Malkavian-owned establishment, but I decided was going to be the Ventru kind of stronghold, the center point. What other than a castle could better represent the Ventru and kind of their ego, their need to control, their willingness to be seen as kind of an overarching authority, especially in the face of this kind of rebellion that had been done against not just the city of Tampa, but against the ruling force of the Ventru. And other places like that started popping out. We had the VA hospital campus, which is one of the larger VA campuses, I would dare say, in the state, if not the country. I knew that they had a pretty impressive mental health facility. That really called to the Malkavians. The Church of Scientology, speaking of occults and occultish things, called to the Tremere for me. So I really was able to start just kind of pinpointing places, and then I started designating territories around those places to give to these specific clans, so they could have a home base, so they could have a gathering point, so that they could feel a sense of ownership that I think many who play in coterie games can totally understand. That once you get a territory in a coterie game, it's yours. You feel a sense of ownership of it. You feel a sense of pride over it, and a sense of control with it. So I assigned the territories. Now I needed leadership. I knew that I did not want to have 50 NPCs. I knew I did not want to have an NPC dominated game. I wanted to have, in the original iteration, 2 NPCs, the prince and the sheriff. That's all I wanted. For the primary city itself, prince and sheriff. The rest of the roles I wanted to fill with PCs. So I took people who had experience in the World of Darkness prior to this, and I took people who just seemed really invested and did their research and their homework and their time, and I slotted them into the positions of the Primogen, because I knew that they were going to need leadership amongst these various clans. I wanted these people to kind of push that clan dynamic, push some of those clan politics. And while it did take some time to kind of sort out and for people to kind of fulfill their roles, it also gave people a sense of something to strive for. If they saw other PCs in positions of power, they knew that they could reach those positions of power as well, that they could work towards something, that there was a way to level up, as it were. But being in a position of power is very, very difficult. It's a hard place to be in. There is a lot of responsibility, and obviously we had to kind of make changes as we went, as people kind of had to step back from those positions or drop out of those positions or just got themselves into so much of a difficult spot that they couldn't, get out of it. And so the consequences caused them to be removed from their positions. But we still managed to maintain those positions. And then came the titles of whip as the kind of second in commands. We had deputies / hounds to the sheriff. There were these positions and opportunities for people. We even originally started with the regent and the primogen of the Tremere being the same role, but eventually those roles broke apart to allow for room for people to advance, for people to step up and take certain positions, and it allowed for all these different opportunities. Because in the world of darkness, there isn't a level 20. There isn't the same kind of incentives to progress, to pursue, to push forward. Yes, you gain XP. Yes, your abilities get better. But for the story's sake, you need to have something to strive for. You need to have something to have ambition for, which is why ambition and desire are such important mechanics in the 5th edition version of the game. You need to have something to reach for. And having these positions in a very political, very role-playing based role-playing game allowed for people to do that. So that's how we got our NPCs, or our PCs, I should say, in the positions of power, who I allowed to also get a little bit more creative freedom and help me build the world. A lot of the lore, as it stands now in St. Pete by Night, is very different from what I had intended originally. People have their fingerprints all over the lore of St. Pete by Night. It's all over the game itself. They have helped shape this lore just as much as I kind of had the founding idea, and that's the way I've always loved to play it. I've always loved to give the opportunity for players to have their footprint be felt, not just on the present and the future, but on the history of the game as well. I want them to feel like they are a part of this world, because that's what's going to keep them playing it. So as this is After Dark, and we do have several questions flooding in the chat, I'm going to take a break from kind of talking about that to address some of the questions that were submitted in advance before the stream. That'll kind of help also paint some of the picture. So, one of the first questions was, what did the territory map look like before the Exodus? So, before the Exodus, there weren't territories per se. It was much more of an open map where there were certain key locations within the cities, within the kind of overall area that the clans tended to congregate near. The the Church of Scientology has always belonged to the Tremere since its founding. So Clearwater was always kind of a Tremere hub. Downtown St. Pete always belonged to the Toreador. While they were officially granted it at a certain point, it was kind of a Toreador congregation place. They wanted to get out of the city. They wanted to work on arts. And yes, they had presences in Tampa as well, but St. Pete kind of became Isabel's city when she was granted that territory, and that led to a lot of congregation. But there were members of various clans spread out all over the map. It was kind of more based off of people being able to take territories as they saw fit, especially in terms of coteries. But the Ventru controlled downtown Tampa. That was never in doubt, except for some of more of the arts areas except for maybe some of the theaters, the venture really considered downtown and the territory as a whole as theirs. But again, in more traditional games, there aren't necessarily clan territories. There are just more hot spots or locations where they tend to congregate. Because a big thing about Kindred, they don't let people know where they live, which is kind of unusual when you see some of the way people have played in St. Pete by Night, but usually they're not going to tell you where they like to meet up. They're not going to tell you where they live. There are some public places like a succubus club or an asylum that are known about, but for the most part, Kindred don't reveal their havens. They don't reveal, their secret locations. They want to keep all of that unknown because Kindred, by their very nature, are very solitary creatures. They're predators. All they're interested in is the hunt, in the prey, and the territory, in getting something, some small piece of the world that is theirs, where everything within it belongs to them. They're not going to be, communal. They're not going to be interested in sharing. They're not going to, even with their own clans, they're not necessarily interested in sharing. If it benefits them in some way, okay. If they can get a piece of someone else's territory in some way, okay. But they're not going to be interested in just sharing the wealth and spreading the love. They want something that is theirs, and they want no one else to take it from them. And the only way they're going to let anyone know that it's theirs is if somebody crosses the line. But, again, being a new kind of game for a new kind of player, I needed to be a little bit softer about that. I did want to, foster a sense of community and a sense of kind of having other people to connect to, or otherwise you would just have a lot of people trying to do their own thing without working with anybody else, which, still happens a little bit to this day. But if you consider that I was one storyteller at the founding of this game, handling potentially 200 players, I don't think anybody in their right mind has time for 200 solo sessions on a potentially weekly basis to tell 200 separate stories. It just wasn't possible. So that's why, again, I pushed the idea of having these clans in these communities. But the map as a whole didn't have the same kind of grid pattern. It just had these kind of hot spots for different clans to congregate, all under Tampa's rule. The next question was, how long had Isabel been plotting? So, on the surface, she was a team player. She was all for working with the Camarilla, working with Marius. She respected Marius as a leader. For all intents and purposes, she was the Rose. She was the one who kind of was more of a seneschal behind the scenes, kind of manipulating things that way and trying to push her agenda without taking the position of power. So, as a Kindred, she'd always been plotting. She always had her own machinations at work, but how long she had been plotting the Exodus really started to take shape in the late 90s, early 2000s. What really was one of the kind of staples of her moving out was kind of a funny story, which was the Tampa Bay Rays, the baseball team. In 1995, when Tampa Bay got its own baseball team, Isabel saw an opportunity to kind of try and grab a little bit of prestige for herself, a little bit of claim. So she had been bidding to have St. Pete be the home of the Tampa Bay Rays, which was unnamed at the time. And she wanted to call them the St. Petersburg Rays. She wanted to give St. Pete something of note nationally and internationally, that she wanted to take this kind of big piece of Americana which was, I mean, baseball is so closely tied with America that it seemed like a really good way to kind of make a mark as a Spanish woman who had come from overseas from a much different bygone era to kind of try and make a mark for her city and to bring more tourism and more kind of business to her city. And while it was a little bit of a struggle, she took it. She won the team, but Marius demanded that they be called Tampa Bay, that they be called the Tampa Bay Rays, and that it was going to be just showing that St. Pete was no more than a suburb of Tampa, that it was just an extension. It wasn't its own unique thing. It didn't deserve its own unique mark. It was going to be still under the overall Tampa umbrella. So 1995, I would say, was around the time that she started really thinking that she needed to break away from this, that this was going to always be kind of Marius's domain and he was going to do with it as he saw fit. And she knew that something needed to change. But when the beckoning set in, that's when planning went into high gear. When Marius started losing that esteem and that power and that kind of commanding leadership is when she really kicked it up another notch and started pushing for the Exodus. The next question, did Isabel have to permanently silence anyone before the Exodus was ready to go? Yes. Yes, she did. She did have to kind of take out, but it wasn't really anyone within the kindred part of the politics, but she did have to take out several kind of spies and ghouls within her own kind of side of things and within her own court, within her own retinue, as it were, that was illustrated in the first Elysium with Mariana, when the Mariana ghoul was killed on the first Elysium. But she herself didn't necessarily silence anybody, but she definitely made use of the resources she had available to position people in the right place to make the right things happen at the right time and to break away from Tampa. Let's see. What was Isabel and Marius's relationship like before she began plotting against him? As I said, a relationship of respect. Marius had come from the old world, much like her, had come from Europe, more towards kind of the Middle Eastern area, but they had both kind of come from the old world and into the new world, and Marius was the epitome of leadership. He was someone, a pillar that you could take comfort in, a symbol of strength and stability. And Isabel recognized that, and she respected it to a point. Like all kindred, she had to see where it was potential to benefit her. And so when Marius had established Tampa and begun his rule and reached out to her to be his primogen, she saw an opportunity. She saw an opportunity to grow. She saw an opportunity to start implementing some changes, to start, she saw a possibility starting to form. And so she took it. But she did respect Marius to a great deal. He was strength. He was leadership. And this was before the beckoning. This was quite some time before the beckoning began. So she saw someone she could kind of hitch her wagon to, because that's the important part about joining a city. If you don't respect the leadership of the city you join, either you are going to try and overthrow it, or you're going to eventually be found out as a traitor and be removed. You have to show a certain level of respect to the leadership, especially in a position of power, if you're going to join that city. But she had a great deal of respect for him. starting out. What was your reasoning behind the placement of the different clans in St. Pete, and how do you feel it impacted the Exodus as a whole? The reasoning is, as I mentioned earlier, there were just certain locations that really called to certain clans. There were certain reasons that people went. The reasons I put the venture on the beach, not only because of the tourism and the commerce, but because it was a good place to escape from if things went badly. These were essentially traitors to their own clan and people who could be viewed as Tampa loyalists by this group of rebels that had just left Tampa and were trying to start up a new Camarilla city. While they wanted to have a presence, as Venture always do, while they wanted to have some sort of position of respect and power, they also needed to be watching their backs, because they knew not only were the Tampa Venture against them, but also the rest of St. Pete could potentially be against them. So I found, and that's just one example, but I found inspiration from these various locations. And while it didn't necessarily play as much of a part on the Exodus, I knew that the Toreador had to be well established here, that this was going to be their home base, and that was going to be a big part of the Exodus. So the Toreador presence was important. The Tremere presence was important because Tremere were going to be some of the strongest allies and assets that the Toreador had in their Exodus. So I knew the Tremere needed to be somewhere, well fortified and kind of well positioned. So those were the two clans that I had primarily focused on for the purposes of the Exodus, but the others kind of fell into place following after that. There were just locations that screamed one clan or another, or neighborhoods that really felt like it belonged to a certain clan. So that was kind of the motivation behind that. Oh, yeah, so as in, was the placement of the Tremere Chantry before planning the storyline or afterwards? It was well before. Well before the planning of the storyline. I knew the minute I set eyes on the Church of Scientology for the first time, that is a Tremere Chantry. Without a doubt. There's just so much kind of mysticism about it, as well as about the faith as a whole. And the area surrounding it has this very clinical but also kind of creepy mystical feel to it, and they have a very strong grasp of the area. Their presence can be felt for miles around, and that, while feeling potentially Venture, or while feeling potentially any other of the kindred clans, there was something eerie and mystical about it that felt very Tremere. So I had that pinned long before I'd written the story. I just knew that was the place. If there was going to be a place, that was the place. While there were some occult shops and bookstores that could have also made good places, I needed them to be in a position of strength. I needed them to have a firm standing, and that was a good place to do it. So yeah, I had that pegged long before the story was even written. Okay, so the next question is, who is Carmine? So for those of you who had joined with the revamp and the second iteration of the game, Carmine had been established as the grandchilder of Prince Isabel, the childer of Charles. And he was just a Toreador, and a very Black Sheep-esque Toreador. While he loved art and loved things of beauty, he did not care for socializing at all. He was not the one going to parties. He was not the one participating in events. And Carmine came into existence because of two players, which was Tyler, who was playing Charles, and AJ, who was playing Adriana. He was the connective tissue between the two of them, because I wanted Charles to be the primogen, which was not his original concept, but as one of the kind of really invested players, he was kind of thrust into the role of being primogen. And Adriana was a newly embraced kindred. So there was a generational gap between them of one, there was a one generational gap. He was 10th, he was 11th, she was 13th, and there was a need for a connective tissue between it. So that's where Carmine was brought into being. It started in Tyler's backstory. It was further expanded upon in AJ's backstory, and Carmine came to be. Little did I know what an important part he was going to play in the long term. I had no idea what he was going to be. I just knew he was going to be this kind of connective tissue, and I built him to be a very kind of focused, business-minded, like a venture among Toreadors when it comes to art. Like, he ran the Museum of Fine Arts as a curator and kind of a museum organizer of sorts. That's where he called home, and he was literally just focused solely on that aspect. That's all he cared about, and was interested in. So he was a very behind the scenes character that just kind of became more and more relevant over time, and people put a lot of faith in him, put a lot of respect in him, and really saw something in him that drew other PCs to him. And so he started to take more and more of an important role in the game, even establishing the triumvirate in the Toreador leadership, with Aurora and Lark and himself, taking on various roles in that leadership. And yeah, I mean, it was kind of a natural progression that the leadership of the city got passed on to him based off of where the story was going, with the fact that Isabel was focusing more on the young inheriting the city, and because of Charles having been caught up in some drama that had happened and Tyler having moved on to a different character, they needed someone to inherit the throne. And so Carmine was kind of pushed into that position, despite being, very, very staunchly Camarilla in kind of contrast to Isabel, who was definitely kind of towing the line between Anarch and Camarilla ideals, especially near the end. It was an interesting transition, and I knew that Isabel was going to be leaving. I knew I needed kind of a fresh start, and so Carmine was pushed into that position of leadership, and it's made for a really good story in the revamp. But that is who Carmine is. Carmine Russo is the grandchilder of Isabel and is the Prince of St. Petersburg, a Toreador. So that answers that question. Can you say some of the reasons / motivations for Isabel to make St. Pete into a more progressive cam territory? So, Isabel being one of my only NPCs when I planned the game, started off very different than how I'd how she ended up being. The first version of Isabel was Queen Bitch Toreador. How you may have seen me play Victoria Ash, how you may have seen me play other Toreador NPCs. That's what she was originally planned to be. The first iteration of Isabel was just going to be ruthless Queen Bitch Toreador. But then as the story started to take shape, and as kind of the ideas started to take shape, I knew I wanted her to be a very faith-based character. I wanted her to have a very, very strong kind of connection to faith and to religion. I knew I wanted her to have a kind of Spanish Latin flair because of, Spain originally having settled the area, especially St. Pete and St. Augustine and stuff like that had originally been discovered by Spanish explorers. I knew I wanted to tie that element into a certain degree. And so it was all sort of clicking that she wasn't going to be evil. but she wasn't necessarily going to be good. She couldn't be either extremity. She had to kind of start to focus near the middle. But also the beckoning aspect of things stood out to me. Okay, so if she seceded from the city because of the beckoning, why? She needed to focus on the young inheriting kind of everything. Because the old model, the old way of thinking, while it had stood for so long, was starting to splinter and crack. The elders who had controlled these cities were just disappearing, were just up and leaving. They were leaving their posts of leadership, or they were falling into torpor, or they were going into hiding, or, like Marius, they were resorting to very, very kind of problematic behavior, to say the very least, in order to maintain their rule, in order to maintain their grasp of power. So she knew that the young needed to inherit. So she needed to build a world for the young to inherit. Now, little known fact about Isabel and about her line, they are descendants of Michael. They descended from Michael's line. For those who don't know Michael is one of the high-ranking Tremere, one of the 5th generation Tremere, one of the Methuselahs of the Tremere, and he was also a foundational part of Constantinople. And Constantinople was a kind of one of the first big major strongholds of the early days of the Kindred Society. It was one of the major free cities of Kindred Society, and this was long before the Camarilla had come into being. And Isabel had been embraced just before the Camarilla was founded. She was at the Conventions of Thorns. She saw when the Camarilla was founded. And while she believed in it at the time, she saw the problems ever since the Camarilla's foundation growing bigger and, cracking more and more and more. And so she really believed in unity amongst all kindred. Yes, the Sabbat were problematic. But the Sabbat problem supposedly had been handled. That was over. The Sabbat were gone. So she had to think about the Anarchs and the Camarilla and what the Camarilla had done to the Anarchs and caused the Anarchs to behave the way they did. So she started thinking about Constantinople, and she started thinking about making St. Pete the new Constantinople. But she still needed some of the security of the Camarilla, because the Camarilla was never going to let that happen. The Camarilla was never going to allow for a new Constantinople to come into being. So she, using the umbrella of the kind of Camarilla as her starting foundation, she started to build her own Constantinople and her own view within St. Petersburg, which is why she invited the Anarch, which is why she kind of put all that together. So that's why her perspective was, because she was basing it off of her great grandsire, and kind of what Constantinople was, in hopes that maybe that could work again. If nothing else, it'll bring all the kindred together and get them all on the same page and stop some of the fighting that the Sabbat had caused and that the division had caused over the centuries since her embrace. Let's see. Can you divulge any juicy details on where Hush came from, or how he came to St. Pete and claimed the title of Scourge? Hush is still a very relevant part of the story, so I'm going to have to tread lightly on how I kind of reveal Hush. So while Isabel was succumbing to the beckoning, she had kind of gotten to a point where her true faith that she had in her, yes, Isabel had true faith, was leaving her. And what was replacing it was oblivion. Oblivion had started kind of worming its way and starting to infect Isabel and her sensibilities and her mind. Well, Hush, like most kind of terrifying things, had always been here, or had been here for a very, very long time, but had not been any kind of presence. He lurked beneath the bay. He was kind of under there for a great long while, just kind of watching and impressing upon the area. And with Isabel's mind slipping, Hush made his way in and had started taking up residence within Isabel's mind. So with that kind of power and that kind of strength, he was able to kind of impress upon and make his way into that position, because he saw what she was doing. He saw that she was faltering and on the brink of leaving, and he saw an opportunity. So to put it very simply, he found his way in because of Isabel's weakened condition, and was able to establish himself. Now, I chose Slenderman, and I chose the particular time period for that to happen because we had actually had a hurricane around that time period, which caused the entire bay to drain out for several, probably 100 yards. The sea level had dropped so dramatically from the hurricane. So much rain and wind had whipped everything up. The sea level dropped so much that it exposed so much of what was under the bay. And so I used that as a motivator to bring Hush into the story. That Hush would wake up from the bay being drained out, and that he would start to have a presence within the city. But truthfully, Hush's presence within the city had been happening for a while before that. That was just when he physically started to manifest in the city. So I hope that's some juicy details. I hope that's kind of juicy enough for you. But because of the ongoing existence of Hush and his presence within the city, I can't discuss too much without potentially spoiling upcoming storylines or anything like that. So I hope that gave a little bit of detail about Hush and his ability to suddenly just be an important part on the scene. Okay. To give some love to our Anarchs, can you tell us about previous Barons and what caused them to lose their position? So, as I'd said, having PC leadership was important to me. Putting PCs in positions of power, one, took a lot of work off my plate because I couldn't be NPCing a Baron, 2 or 3 different Barons, the Prince, the Sheriff, all these different positions. I really couldn't, I couldn't do that considering the size of the player base. And even with expanding to other storytellers and bringing out other help in, I really wanted storytellers to have the freedom to kind of drift about, and I wanted players to feel like they were impacting the game. So when we did eventually decide to open the game to Anarchs, when we did allow Anarchs, for story reasons and otherwise, to have kind of a presence within the game, I knew we wanted PC Barons. And we did kind of democratically elect our first PC Barons. Now, it was a small group that was selected from. There weren't a lot of Anarch players. We were slowly letting Anarch players in because we didn't want Anarchs to kind of take over the entire area. This is still a very Camarilla-focused, centric game. We wanted to let Anarch players play. So we had several people come in. We allowed them to kind of make their petition to become Barons, because Barons, unlike Princes, unlike, Justicars or anything like that, they don't just take their position, say it's theirs, and own that area. it's more of a democratic process. If you don't have the anarchs backing you, if you don't have the secured power base, you're not going to be a baron for long. But also, having those positions means a lot of responsibility, and it means a lot of criticism. And every move you make, every breath you take, people are watching you. Your fellows are watching you, especially among anarchs who, if they believe you've failed, have all of the right in the world to take it. They have all the right in the world to overthrow you and take it. There is no greater Camarilla watching over you that is going to come in and say, no, we picked this person. Like, no, you're not allowed. It's the free states. So if you want it, it's yours for the taking. Part of becoming a baron isn't just getting the position. It's about keeping the position. It's about holding the territory. And sometimes that means, giving the people what they want. Sometimes it means, a little bit more iron will. It was an experience for the first barons, and while one of the first elected barons is still a baron now, they are a co-baron now. And with play times and with, availability and with the stress of the position of power, there can be criticisms. So one of the early barons got overthrown by members of their barony. Another baron stepped down from the position as they stepped away from the game. I brought in an NPC baron, Sebastian, to kind of create some stability amongst the anarchs and to try and have somebody in a position of power, kind of like the prince, but not quite the prince, that was able to still kind of hold a power base while also creating some interesting political intrigue for our barons at the time by putting some pressure on them and turning the screws on them and showing them that this isn't Camarilla Light. These are the anarchs for a reason. And so started to kind of put some pressure on them through that regard. But PC leadership is tough because there's a lot of people looking to you. There's a lot of people, calling upon you. And it's not for the faint of heart. So for those of you looking to become barons, looking to become primogen, looking to become stabilizing points of leadership, you have to understand it's very difficult to maintain. And now in the new iteration, with it being less on clan or barony politics, having that stable force of NPC barons and positions of power helps us tell the stories we're telling. But that's not to say there aren't other possibilities for those with the strength and ambition to rise the ranks. But for at least the starting of the revamp, we wanted to make sure all the positions of power were NPCs so that people could focus on smaller stories, more coterie-based stories, as well as their individual personal stories. So I hope that answers some question about the anarchs. Again, I don't want to point fingers. It's a hard job. It's a hard job to be in a position of power. We've had great primogen. We've had some not so great primogen. We've had people in positions of power. It's a lot, and I think people don't necessarily know what they're signing up for when they take the position, and having to figure it out is a difficult thing. But yeah, that's kind of why. There's a lot of reasons in game and out of game why positions of powers changed hands over a quick period of time. Did you have any inspirations from working on the lore of St. Pete? Yes, absolutely. I took a lot of inspiration from the Tale of Two Cities. A lot of inspiration because of Tampa and St. Pete being in such close proximity, because of the kind of the rivalry between the two. I took a lot of inspiration from some rather dark love stories for Isabel and Aitz's storyline. It was a love that couldn't be, that two diametric opposites that find this mutual kind of connection. So that was a big kind of important inspiration for that story. But yeah, I take inspiration from everything, just from the community itself, as I've talked about earlier. certain areas just told a certain story, had a certain feel. And so I wanted to really put a lot of merit and weight into that story. And so, yeah, I mean, there are lots and everything's inspired me. I'm one to often say that there aren't really original stories anymore. There's just retelling of other stories or stories that have the fingerprints of several other inspirations, but the core stories themselves are kind of they're not necessarily solely original. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If it works, why wouldn't you use it? Why wouldn't you tell it? So yeah, I mean, a lot of the stories are inspired by various sources of media, even in bits and pieces. Eights was inspired by the Wild West. I knew I wanted to tell a Wild West story, and obviously it grew from there. But that's in-game information I can't give. But it's all in there. Like there's bits and pieces of so many different things, characters I've played, stories I've been a part of, stories I've watched, and I constantly gain new inspiration all the time. So those are just a couple of examples, but you can see the fingerprints of so many different inspirations. The more and more you look at the city, the more and more you look at the way it's being run. There was the Queen of the Tierling, which is a book series, was a huge inspiration for Isabel and for St. Pete as a whole as well. So if you haven't heard of that book series, go check it out. The Queen of the Tierling. So good. So that was a huge inspiration for St. Pete as a whole as well. Why St. Petersburg? And do you think the choice of St. Petersburg helped or hurt with the way the game has progressed? Well, St. Petersburg, as I'd mentioned earlier, it's the city I live in. It's the city I frequent. It's the city I know the best. While I could have set it in Tampa, and while I am expanding it more to Tampa with Werewolf, and into Sarasota with Hunter, I know St. Pete. I know the streets. I know the feel. And as the one who was going to be, at the time that this game was created, telling the story, I was going to be the only storyteller for the whole game, which I'm so glad I'm not. I needed to know what I was talking about. I needed to be able to paint a very vivid picture to people. I needed to be able to create this world and make people see it. And so I picked the place I knew. I picked the place that inspired me and gave me a good feel. Sometimes when I'm running some of my Tampa sessions, my details can be a little bit vague because I don't know Tampa nearly as well as I know St. Pete. And even sometimes now I'll go for drives to remind myself of, okay, this is where this is happening next. This is going to be an important location for a story I'm telling. So I can relearn it and restudy it. Because when I first described the Dali Museum at Elysium, I hadn't been to the Dali in a while, and it was very different upon a return visit than I had been describing it, and I had to kind of fix that a little bit with the way I was describing it moving forward. So that, those types of things happen, but it's nice to have that ability to go out and see it for myself and to re-experience it for the purposes of telling further stories in the future. So that's why I chose St. Pete. It's the perfect place for me because I get to experience it every single day and I love it so much. So I try to give it respect, but I also try to give it reality, which is it's not always great and it's not all the great areas. There are some rundown areas. There are some violence that happens here. So I'm trying to be honest about it, but I also respect and love it so much. And hey, I got like 60 people to visit it last year, so that's positive. How much lore was established ahead of time and how much grew through gameplay? A little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. The basis for the lore, the Tale of Two Cities, the rivalry between them, the love story between Isabel and Eights, that was all pre-planned. A lot of that I knew in my head going forward, before the story even started. but most of it, I will say, came from gameplay. I am what you would call an improvisational storyteller. So I don't have a full game plan when I go into anything. I make up most of what you've seen on the fly. I didn't know about the Theo storyline because Barrow wasn't part of the game. I didn't know, or part of the storyteller team before that. Like a lot of this stuff just comes from inspiration from the way you guys play, from the way players play, from the way people bring things to the story. Adamar, who is the regent of the Tremere Chantry, was an NPC sire from a character who's no longer in the game, from a character who isn't in play anymore. Adamar was created by them. I just gave him more context and filled him in and found a position for him and gave him some stability within the Tremere when they needed it. And that's basically it. A lot of this was just, it seemed like a good time to do it, or something that a player did inspired me, or even something I saw in a movie or on TV or while driving around or whatever the case may be inspired me to do it. So yeah, I would say that some central kind of pillars of the lore was established ahead of time, but most of it came through experience and through gameplay. So that's kind of the answer to that. What was the inspiration behind Isabel as a character? Like I said, the Queen of the Tierling, which if you haven't read it, go read it. It's a great book series. But also, I knew I wanted to have a female prince. I knew I wanted the kind of Latin Spanish origin from the discovery of the area, as well as a good population of the area is either of Latin or Mexican or Spanish descent. And I knew that I wanted the faith element of it as well. So all of those pieces combined kind of put Isabel into being. I knew I wanted her to look young but be very old. I knew I wanted her to be beautiful merit 6 times over, because I wanted her to be beautiful on the outside, dangerous on the inside. I wanted her to give off this kind of beautiful exterior, but this sharp, deadly interior, that she was not someone to be messed with, but that she could lure you in and draw you in with that. Plus, I wanted to have a staunch opposition to Marius, and I knew Marius was going to be Marius. I knew he was going to be this kind of big, scary boogeyman of Aventru, so I wanted to have diametric opposites. Marius was going to be that. I wanted the opposite to be Isabel, to really further enforce the tale of the two cities, the separation between the two. So it made sense. All of those things kind of just fell into place the way I needed it to fall into place. So it worked out really, really, really well. Is there ever going to be an event that brings all of us for a small while, like a Tampa pushing on the boundary? What was okay? I do want world events to be a thing. Part of what makes those world events a thing is having multiple different storytellers running multiple different pieces at the same time. Theo, for example, was one of our major world events over several different splats. Theo had an impact on the Hunters, Theo had an impact on the Anarchs, Theo had an impact on the Camarilla. And that was kind of a trial run of running world events, but also, we were burning out and we needed to take a break. So yes, potentially, but we need to have firm, established, experienced storytellers. We need to know that all the varying moving pieces work, that the groups are stable and stick together more than just a couple of months or a few weeks. So there's a lot that goes into planning something like that. But yes, at some point, we would like to have kind of various elements that could affect multiple different parties and give the different coteries and groups opportunities to impact the overall story. But we are still going to focus on a coterie-based mindset even during world events. We're not going to have a big everyone's in a chat at the same time. It's all going down like we did before. Those were hell to run. Those were very difficult to manage. And they always kind of got a little bit out of control. So even if we do run world events that do bring kind of connections between multiple coteries, we're still going to keep separation between the coteries so that each coterie gets their moment, so that each player gets their moment, that each person can feel like they are an impactful part of those events and that story, because it's so easy to get lost in the shuffle. We had, I think at the SI raid, the first SI raid, 20 something people, and then at the verandas we had like 90 people, broken up into 3 groups. It was so difficult to let people have their moment, to let people stand out, to focus on anybody in specific. So I will probably never run anything like that again for this game. But yeah, we do have plans for overarching world events. We just want to make sure that the stories are off the ground and running first before we start doing anything like that. What was the most surprising lore development in the last iteration? Oh boy. For the players or for me? So for the players, or at least a core group of players, I think it was the Tampa by Night stream that we did, which you can go back and watch, as well as the trial of Rowan McClade, which was Tampa really asserting themselves as NPCs in more than just rumors and more than just their existence as a whole, even though people hated them long before they even got to see them. That stream, with the revelation that Esme Alvarez, who is believed to have been Diablerized by Marius, was actually alive and kept as a white underneath Elysium in Tampa. I think that was a huge, surprising lore development for people, especially since a lot of people had Esme as a connection through one way or another, and that revelation that she was still very much alive, I think shocked a lot of people. I think also the kind of unveiling of Isabel kind of doing a Constantinople thing was surprising to a lot of people, because a lot of people came in with a very like PvP-esque mindset, a very like, I gotta one up over other people, which they should, being Vampire the Masquerade, but I think that it revealing a sense of community and stuff was also surprising to some people. But yeah, I would say for overall shock value, I would say that the Esme revelation was a big one. And then Isabel leaving would also be another one. I think a lot of people didn't think Isabel would actually leave. I had hinted at it. People were trying to fix it. But the fact that Isabel actually did leave at the end of the first iteration, I think really was impactful and a huge moment for everybody, that she left of her own free will at the end of the first iteration came across as a surprise to a lot of people. So, yeah. What do you see for the future of the Cam Anarch relationship? I honestly don't know. That's what makes me so excited about a game like this, is that I can never say. I can never say what's going to happen. This is how players are impactful. You know, it takes one group of anarchs screwing up bad enough to bring the whole weight of the cam down upon them. They are here as guests, and I think that they constantly forget that. Isabel really stressed trying to make them feel welcome and at home, but they are only here because the cam lets them be here. And I know that's gonna bristle a few egos out there, but that's the truth. The anarchs do not have the forces to stand against the cam, and the anarchs as a movement usually continue to exist because the cam doesn't view them as much of a threat. I think just the overall, that whole bit was is true. It's just that the Anarchs are allowed to exist because they haven't become a big enough problem yet. And I think that's just in the story as a whole, in the whole setting. The Anarchs think they're stronger than they are, but the cam haven't gotten upset enough to do anything about it. Small cities have, but the overall cam hasn't gotten angry enough with the Anarchs to do anything about it. So, but yeah, I could see those kinds of issues coming into play in this iteration of the game. I could see that that's still happening, and I could see that changing the dynamic as a whole. I mean, the Anarchs came in not only because we wanted to bring some Anarchs in, but because the story allowed them to. When some people went out to California and met with Smiling Jack, and kind of that whole interaction led to the formation of the Anarch territories in St. Pete. So yeah, anything can happen, and that's what's beautiful about this game. Hell, the Guru might just come in and take out all of the vampires. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. But anything is possible, and that's what I love about it. Is it's a constantly developing story that the players have impact in. That's where it's most felt, is the players do help drive that portion of the story. However, it's got to be enough players. One player is not going to change the entire setting. Well, not completely. So, yeah. What are the differences and similarities between Isabel's and Carmine's approach to being prince? The differences are, Isabel was, and it doesn't seem so if you were a part of the first iteration and saw her work, she was a lot more forgiving. Carmine is a lot more of a by-the-books Camarilla. He believes in upholding the traditions. He doesn't like chaos in his territory, which is why Al became an autarchus. For those who know about Al, Al was ejected from the territory. He does not care for the Anarchs being at his northern border, but he also is trying to pay reverence to what she was building. He is trying to show appreciation and respect to his grandsire and to her vision, but he is a lot more by the books, a lot more order, and a lot less beauty and passion. He's not your traditional Toreador. Yes, he respects beauty. Yes, he respects art, but he is not an artist. He is the money guy of the artwork. He is the administrator and executive of the artwork. He's not going to throw lavish costume balls for Elysium. He's going to throw business meetings. He's going to throw, he's going to make it less of a production and more of a let's get shit done type deal. Like, this is a problem, we take care of the problem. Like, this needs to be done, we get this done. And so I think that's going to really show more and more for those who've had the opportunity to meet with Carmine ever since the new iteration. We've had a couple of people have interactions with Carmine. I think they've gotten to see firsthand the very different sides of it, the differences between the two of them as leaders. And I wish people could have seen Isabel be a leader, but you can go back and watch those episodes on YouTube or on Twitch here to see all the original Elysiums where you got to see Isabel on full display versus what you might see as Carmine moving forward. So yeah, I would say those are the major differences. But the similarities are they want what's best for the future of Kindred. They want the young to be able to have a place to age and gain experience safely. I would say Carmine's a little less interested in the young, but he also being young, so to speak, I think relates to it as well. But he also knows that chaos could break out at any moment, and he can't have that in his city. What's been built here is far more important than the individuals who are living in it. It's kind of a legacy thing. Um, yeah. So going back to the lore, Tampa has always belonged to Marius. It does contradict some of the, I guess, EU lore about Vampire the Masquerade. There were like 3 novels written that talked about the Tampa court. Most of those stories took place in Sarasota, but it talked a little bit and touched a little bit on the Tampa court. And so this lore is contradictory to that lore, but in my lore of Tampa, Marius has always been prince since the city's foundation in the 1800s, when he came over from Europe and took praxis as prince in Tampa. And while Miami has kind of flip-flopped, it was a battleground for the Sabbat and the Anarchs and the Camarilla, kind of changing hands back and forth until the Camarilla took it over firmly after the Sabbat left, and then switched to Anarch. The Camarilla have always controlled Tampa. They've been the stronghold, kind of keeping whatever rebellious forces are controlling the South from moving north. Also, you have to remember Mexico City for a long time was a Sabbat stronghold. It was a huge Sabbat stronghold. And there's only a gulf between the two. So they were kind of defending against Mexico as well. But that they had been the southern shield of the Camarilla of the eastern seaboard from things moving up north since their inception. So that's kind of the lore of Tampa, is that it's always belonged to the Camarilla under Marius. Now, with Marius's rule and establishment during his time of first taking control of the city, the Garou populated the area in a great number, and until about 10 or so years ago, the Garou and the Camarilla had been kind of warring back and forth over the territory. The Garou had been kind of sticking to the outskirts, but were a constant problem for the Camarilla and for Marius, and until Marius sent Bloody Mary against the Garou, and she proceeded to wipe out and drive off all of the Garou in the area around Tampa. And you're going to find out more about this if you watch Rage Across Tampa as we develop that lore more and more. But the idea is that the local Garou populations were driven out because of Bloody Mary, except for a small group of Bone Gnars who took up position in the northern part of Pinellas County for a little while before leaving and heading to Texas. But yeah, the Garou have been kind of driven out. They've been driven more south towards the Everglades, or driven more north. They've all kind of scattered out of the area because of Marius and because of Bloody Mary. They moved out. And so the story about Rage Across Tampa is them kind of trying to find their way in, as Marius's power base has weakened significantly with the establishment of St. Pete, with the Beckoning taking an even further toll on him, with the backlash from all the Theo stuff. His control has wavered a great deal, and so the Garou are slowly returning and reestablishing their presence within Tampa, hopefully. And then Sarasota, for the hunters, just kind of worked out. I mean, honestly, I have to give a lot of credit to Das, who was one of our storytellers for a brief little while and a member of the mod team, as well as the, unveiling of the Hunter core book, as well as the timing of the emissary missions for Praxis. Sarasota made a great place to set up the hunters. I had read the novels about Sarasota, and so I kept some of the in-character or some of the canon they'd established in those novels in Sarasota, and I knew I wanted to have a big moment for the hunters. And so I had them ambush the meeting with the Sarasota prince, kill the prince, and send the entire area into disarray. And that's on stream as well. So if you want to see that, go check out the old episodes. But that seemed like a good place for the hunters to be, where they're nearby, but they're not too close. I had originally intended for there to be a little more crossover a lot sooner, but because there was some instability in the hunter kind of core group, as well as the storytelling team that was running Hunter, those plans kind of had to be backburnered. And so we really focused on making sure they were stable, and then the iteration came to an end. But yeah, that was kind of the establishment of those. But really, the focus was on the Camarilla when the game first started. I did not expect right away to have Anarchs or Hunters or anything like that, but I also want to keep up with the 5th edition material as it's being released. So yes, a lot of moving parts go into the lore. A lot of different pieces have to come in, and a lot of adapting, because we want to stay relevant, we want to stay up to date, we want to try the new systems as they come out. I have been personally loving playing Werewolf ever since it was released, and I'm excited to open that up to more players, hopefully in the next couple of months here. At least after KindredCon, I'm hoping to run a Werewolf one-shot at some point for some new players to try out Werewolf. But yeah, I want to open up the settings because, more opportunities, more variety is better. Allowing people to play vampires, then switch over to something else has been really refreshing for those players. It's given a new respect and more education in the game, and it's a good thing. So, this has been a lot of scattered stuff, but I hope it did give you a better understanding of St. Pete by Night and a better understanding of the lore. I appreciate all of the questions that were sent in. There was a lot of great questions, a lot of great insight. Next time we do a lore session, I'm going to talk about the Exodus and how that was such a monumental and important event, and kind of the fallout of the Exodus leading up to the start of the game itself and the first court of St. Petersburg, and why those characters were put in their positions and why they were so important, and what part they had played in the Exodus itself and in the kind of creation of the city of St. Petersburg. So I really hope that this has been super insightful. I hope that this has given you a lot of information that you didn't have before, and kind of an understanding of where my mindset was with the game's creation and with the creation of the area. And I hope it gives you an appreciation for St. Pete, that it is a very, very inspiring area. And if you haven't had the chance to visit, come visit us at a future KindredCon. Come be a part of KindredCon and see the city for yourself. I think, hopefully, you will see it through the eyes and the pictures that we have painted for you, but also that you can kind of get some inspiration about the setting and your characters as well moving forward. Last question, and I will answer this before we sign off for the evening, is will we ever get a memoriam about the Exodus? Yes. Yes, you will get a memoriam about the Exodus. We are planning on streaming at some point either a small multi-session story or potentially a one-shot of the Exodus itself, of a group of kindred escaping Tampa for St. Pete during the time of the Exodus and all of the events surrounding it. Got that lined up. Still kind of working out the details of it, making sure everything else is stable first before I start adding on a bunch of extras. But that is in the planning. That is in my intentions for the future of the story and the stream, is to show you at least a small kind of snapshot of what happened during the Exodus and why it was such a monumentous but also controversial event in the story of the lore. But thank you all so much for joining me tonight. I really hope This answered some questions, and I'm hoping to do a multi-part series of this. I'm hoping that you will have more questions for me. Continue submitting those questions and continue sending them in about the lore and about the game as a whole, about in character and out of character motivations for stuff. These AMAs are truly an ask me anything. I will tell you, as long as it doesn't interfere with current storylines, or as long as it won't give anything away that is too important or fundamental for the going forward of the game, I will tell you the truth. I will tell you the answers about some of the stories that never got a final, or information that was never released. I will be as forthcoming about it as possible. So keep submitting those questions. But thank you all so much for joining me here tonight. Thank you to Champ, the moderator, for watching the chat and continuing to send me questions even while the stream was going. I really, really appreciate her for doing that. And I appreciate all of you for watching and for playing and for participating. If you're not a part of St. Pete by Night, check us out. Go check out stpbynight.com. Go join the Discord, which is linked down below. Go pick up some merch. We have some amazing merch of the old and new iterations. So go check that out. If you're coming to KindredCon, I'm really excited to see you next week. Programming note, we will have Rage Across Tampa on Tuesday, but then we're going to be off for at least a week over the KindredCon weekend. So there will be no Don't Get Caught on Thursday. There will be no After Dark on Saturday next week. Just pay attention to the Twitch schedule. That'll tell you when things will be airing. But thank you guys all so much for watching tonight. Stay tuned for another After Dark after we get back from KindredCon, where we will review KindredCon and see how it went for a couple of first-time goers who went, as well as some people who had been to the first one. But thank you so much for watching. Love you all. Have a good evening.